In 1986, Nintendo did something rather odd in Japan. They released a floppy disk drive for their popular 8-bit home game console, the Famicom. That's the very same Famicom that would later be released around the world as the NES. But instead of being a VCR-like box that ate up little gray cartridges, the Famicom's cartridges were smaller, more colorful, and at that early point in its lifespan, they did not support save batteries. Nintendo decided to counter this by taking a cue from the world of computers. Instead of cartridges, they were going to make the Famicom play games off floppy disks. This is Stuff We Play, home of everything weird and retro. Today's look, how the Famicom Disk System tried to change the game. Today's video is sponsored by Buyee. The Famicom Disk System may have only been released in Japan, but that doesn't mean you can't try to snag one for yourself, along with a wide variety of other Japanese goods. Buyee is an import service that allows you to browse and purchase items from Japanese stores. Amazon Japan, Rakuten, Zozotown, these are just a few of the sites you can buy from using their service. You can even bid on auctions via Yahoo Auctions Japan through them. A fantastic way in itself to snag some import games like Monster Rancher 2 here. All you have to do is search for what you want on their site, place a bid or purchase your item outright, and then, once that's done, your items will be sent to Buyee Secure Warehouse in Japan. Once there, your items will be prepared and shipped straight to your door. It's that easy! Shipping through Buyee is fast and efficient. And if you use the link down in the description below, you will get 2,000 yen to use on your first purchase. That's roughly 22 Canadian dollars. So what are you waiting for? Go and give Buyee a browse today. And on that note, let's dive into the Famicom Disk System. A year and some back, I briefly talked about the Famicom Disk System, or FDS as it's often called, in a video I did in a Sharp Twin Famicom. However, I think it's important that I now go back and cover the original base FDS system itself. I mean, first off, it's a cool piece of tech. It's weird and retro after all, that's kind of my MO. Second off though, my Famicom Disk System is complete in box. Just look at that manual, it even has a little comic in it. Can you believe this thing didn't even originally ship with a power supply? I hope y'all like C batteries. Finally though, my FDS actually had a broken drive belt. That meant, without repairing it, I wouldn't be able to play any games with it. So I guess this is technically an episode of Stuff We Make, because while I go over the history of the system, I'm going to intersperse footage of myself opening up the FDS, cleaning it, removing the old belt, adding a new one I got off eBay for a few bucks, finally testing out some games. This footage right here is actually from late last year, hence why you can see me testing it with the twin Famicom, as funnily enough, I didn't get a regular stock Famicom of my own until a few months back. Even then, I'm half convinced this thing is a bootleg. Anyways, let's talk history. The NES was released worldwide in 1985. Famicom, on the other hand, predated it by 2 years. You know how people on YouTube often talked about the video game crash of 1983? Yeah, that was just a North American thing. The video game market in most of the rest of the world was pretty okay. I mean, sure, if things never got better stateside, it would have had a profound effect on the rest of the world, I'm sure, in some capacity. But in Japan in 1983, things looked pretty good. Like the NES, the Famicom was a system that played games from cartridges. It's almost like it's the same system, but in a different form factor. Unlike the NES though, its controllers were hardwired, and it could only output video over RF, like an Atari 2600 or something. Now, as mentioned earlier, thanks in part to the compactness of the Famicom cartridges, save batteries weren't widespread, and though many later Famicom games would feature expansion chips inside of them, the technology just was not quite there yet by 1984. Games were fairly expensive too, potentially costing the equivalent of 40 Canadian dollars each. In comparison, games for computers of the day that came on floppy disk and cassette tapes were vastly cheaper. Famously in the UK, there are games for microcomputers such as the ZX Spectrum that cost as low as £1.99, the equivalent of $3.50 CAD. But the Famicom quickly came to dominate in Japan, even despite the game prices. Nintendo's system was selling incredibly well. By 1985, over 3 million had been sold in Japan alone. but both those at Nintendo and those in charge of several of their vendors felt that they could make games that were even cheaper and more accessible. Nintendo's first attempt at bringing a more computer-esque storage medium to the Famicom came in 1984 with the Famicom Data Recorder. This Famicom accessory took standard cassette tapes and, in theory, seems like Nintendo's foray into budget gaming. In reality though, no actual games were released via tape for exclusive use with the data recorder. Instead, it was merely used with 4 different titles as a means of saving progress and saving user-created content. It could even be used with an optional keyboard and a basic program cart to turn the Famicom into, well, a very basic capable computer. Whether it be due to cassettes coming with long load times or already being seen as aging tech by the mid-80s, Nintendo decided to only support the data recorder for less than a year. This was also because they had a new accessory in the works, one that took larger, more durable floppy disks that could store game data on each side, and that, though more expensive than the cassette tapes, was still cheaper than cartridges. This was the Famicom Disk System. First released in February 1986 for the princely sum of 15,000 yen, or around $175 CAD. This was a high price of entry for an add-on to an existing system, and the FDS was not a small unit, with becoming common practice to just sit base Famicoms on top of it. Infamously, it required its own source of power. Now, unlike Sega, who would later also infamously require its Sega CD and 32X units to use their own power bricks in addition to that in the Sega Genesis, Nintendo had an ingenious plan to keep the FDS's power brick low profile. Instead of requiring the brick, they would just sell it separately, and also give the option to power it with 6 C-cell batteries. Yikes. Now, okay, I've joked about this twice so far, but I think the C batteries things, as ridiculous as it seems initially, is actually a pretty ingenious idea. Imagine living in Japan back in the 80s, your house having only one TV, perhaps a lamp or something taking up the other outlet space. As silly as it may seem, the C batteries actually would save on space in some situations, and avoid you having to go out and buy like a power strip or something. And maybe Nintendo was onto something there. After all, the Famicom Disk System would be a huge initial success. Was it due to it being a rather attractive looking brick of a system, being adored in the same shade of midlife crisis Corvette red as the base Famicom? Was it due to floppy disks with FDS games on them retailing for, on average, only half the price of the cartridge counterparts? Or was it because Nintendo marketed the thing really well, even going so far as to create a new sentient floppy disk mascot for it, named Discoon? Well, I'd argue that all of those things probably helped, but the FDS's initial success was also hugely thanks in part to its launch lineup. While the majority of games available at the FDS's launch were just cheap disc-based ports of older Famicom games, there was one completely original title that made the system a must-have for many a Japanese gamer. This was the Hyrule Fantasy, an overhead adventure title that would later make its way to Western shores as the original Legend of Zelda. And this would be a bit of a tone setter, as it would be one of many prominent titles that, initially at least, were only available via floppy disk in Japan. The original Metroid, Castlevania 2, Super Mario Bros. 2, the Japanese version, and Doki Doki Panic, also known as Super Mario Bros. 2, the American version, even the original release of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, were all only originally available for the Famicom Disk System. And sure, some of them required disk swapping and load times due to the nature of the software, but this came with the benefit of most of them having built-in save systems and music that could take advantage of an additional sound channel. Perhaps the coolest thing about the FDS though, is the disc writer kiosk. This is the one thing Nintendo did for this system that both made it a hit with customers and a pain to collect for nowadays. Floppies by nature are rewritable, and for the equivalent of $3.50 a pop, you could take your disc to a Nintendo disc writer kiosk and choose from a variety of new titles to write onto your existing discs. Or if you didn't feel like writing over your old games, you could buy some blank blue discs to pop in there as well. But most didn't. Now, some larger games could take up both sides of a disc, but most were rather small, meaning that you could fit one game on each side of your floppy disk. I think we can see how this could make collecting a pain. Nowadays, you may buy an FDS game off eBay thinking you're getting All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros., when in reality, your disc is filled with Mahjong and Othello. Despite Nintendo's best efforts, pirated discs still managed to gain some popularity. Nintendo's form of disc protection involved having their company name carved into the bottom of every single FDS disc. However, bootleggers soon found that they could make compatible discs just by carving out a rectangle in a similar spot on their own 3-inch discs. Also, one of the most prominent brands of unofficial FDS discs was called TurboDisk. You can't make this shit up. Despite all its initial perks and early success, the FDS became obsolete tech within a couple of years. I mean, the same year the Famicom Disk System saw release, Capcom released a port of the arcade game Ghosts 'n Goblins for the Famicom, a cartridge-based port. This was the largest cartridge ever seen in the Famicom up to that point, clocking in at a whopping 128 kilobytes in storage size. On top of that though, the FDS was at one point planned for a North American release, but Nintendo of America ultimately opted to bring over games such as Zelda and Metroid on cartridges that featured fancy new save battery technology or that just relied on old-fashioned password save systems. Floppy disks just weren't the way forward for Nintendo. In 1990, the same year the Famicom Disk System was discontinued, the 16-bit Super Famicom would be released, better known as the Super Nintendo in the West. And like the original Famicom, its games would come on cartridges. Though Nintendo would try their hands with floppy disk-based games again in 1999 with the release of the Nintendo 64 disk drive for the Nintendo 64. However, after years of development hell, this would only be available via mail order in Japan and would be one of the least successful pieces of hardware Nintendo ever released. Besides, by that point, floppy disks were on their way out everywhere. Nintendo had already earned flack for sticking with cartridges on the Nintendo 64, as it was clear by then that CD and DVD-based games were the way of the future. The FDS is an odd piece of Nintendo history, and though it never saw widespread success, it definitely wasn't a failure. Several classic series got their start via FDS releases, and the system itself is a symbol of a time when Nintendo wanted to provide hardware that was cheap, accessible, and high quality. This is a type of thinking that I just think isn't nearly as common from major game companies nowadays. On the flip side, I'd argue there's no reason to collect for the FDS either. These systems have belt-driven floppy drives that are prone to failure, and many of the great FDS games later got cartridge-based re-releases. Even The Legend of Zelda, the game that helped propel the Famicom Disk System to massive early success, would get a cartridge-based Famicom release in 1994. Even by then, the FDS was a relic of the past. But you know what? It's still very weird and retro. And it's also worth remembering. Even if the Famicom Disk System didn't take the world by storm, it still shows what can happen when the worlds of console gaming and PC gaming collide. So on that note, thank you for hanging out with me as we explored the Famicom Disk System today. It really is one of my favorite pieces of Japanese exclusive tech, and I'm glad Buyee wanted to make this vid possible. I'd also like to quickly give a huge thank you to my Patreon patrons, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subs who help support what I do. Get access to early content, behind the scenes footage, and episodes of the Speedrun podcast a week early for as low as $1 a month. I also have a Ko-fi page now too, because money me, money now. So on that note, thank you very much for watching. Stay classy, and I'll see you next time.